1. The enemy within. The invisible saboteur. Marcus stood at his bathroom mirror at 3 a.m., staring at the rejection email on his phone. Another promotion passed over. Another opportunity slipped away. The same pattern that had haunted him for years. Getting close to success, then somehow finding a way to destroy it all. "I'm just unlucky," he whispered to his reflection, but even as the words left his lips, they felt hollow. Deep down he knew something else was at work. Something darker. Something that Carl Jung would have recognized immediately as the shadow, the hidden architect of self-destruction. In the sterile fluorescent light, Marcus couldn't see what Jung saw so clearly, that every human being carries within them an unconscious saboteur, a part of the psyche that works tirelessly against their conscious goals. This isn't weakness or laziness. It's the shadow, and it's been manipulating Marcus's choices, relationships, and future from the very beginning. The shadow, as Jung described it, is the unconscious storehouse of traits, emotions, and desires that individuals either reject or suppress. When these disowned parts remain hidden, they resurface through fear, self-criticism, and destructive patterns that feel like they're coming from nowhere. But they're not random, they're strategic, calculated, and devastatingly effective. Marcus's story begins in childhood, like all shadow stories do. At 8 years old, he learned that success meant disappointment. His father, a failed entrepreneur, would rage whenever Marcus achieved something his father couldn't. "Don't get too big for your britches, boy," became the family motto. Success equaled danger. Achievement meant abandonment. So Marcus's psyche did what all psyches do when faced with an impossible choice. It found a way to protect him. It created an internal saboteur, a shadow figure whose job was to ensure Marcus never succeeded enough to trigger his father's wrath. The problem is that protective mechanism never got the memo that Marcus was no longer 8 years old. Now, at 35, Marcus's shadow continues its protective mission with ruthless efficiency. It whispers doubts before important presentations. It creates emergencies that prevent him from networking. It makes him procrastinate on crucial deadlines, ensuring he never quite reaches the level of success that once felt so dangerous. The terrifying truth Jung understood is that we don't just have one enemy. We are our own enemy. The mind that dreams of success is the same mind that systematically destroys it. The heart that yearns for love is the same heart that sabotages every meaningful relationship. This isn't a bug in the human system. It's a feature, designed to keep us safe from perceived threats that may no longer exist. As Marcus finally turns off the bathroom light and heads back to bed, he has no idea that his shadow is already planning tomorrow's sabotage. A missed alarm here, a forgotten document there, a moment of self-doubt at exactly the wrong time. The shadow works in shadows, and its greatest weapon is that its host never sees it coming. But Jung knew something else. Something that would change everything for Marcus if he could only see it. The shadow isn't just a destroyer. It's also a guardian of untapped power, hidden talents, and suppressed strengths. The very force that's been working against Marcus contains the key to his liberation. The enemy within isn't just an enemy, it's a disowned ally waiting to be reclaimed. The question isn't whether Marcus has a shadow. Everyone does. The question is whether he'll continue to be its unconscious victim, or whether he'll find the courage to turn and face the darkness within. Because as Jung discovered, the only way out is through. And the journey begins with a single terrifying realization. The call is coming from inside the house. 2. The architecture of self-destruction. How your mind becomes your worst enemy. Dr. Sarachan thought she had it all figured out. Top of her medical school class, residency at Johns Hopkins, a promising career in neurosurgery ahead of her. But as she sat in her car outside the hospital at 2 a.m., hands shaking too violently to start the engine, she couldn't understand how everything had gone so wrong. The panic attacks had started 3 months ago, always before major surgeries. The trembling hands, the racing heart, the overwhelming certainty that she was about to kill someone. Her colleagues called it normal resident stress, but Sarah knew better. This felt intentional, calculated, like something inside her was actively trying to destroy her career. What Sarah didn't realize is that she was experiencing what Jung called the autonomous psychic fragments, complexes that operate like independent entities within the psyche. These aren't just thoughts or feelings. They're organized psychological systems with their own agendas, their own intelligence, and their own methods of control. Jung described complexes as puppet masters that manipulate our behavior from behind the scenes. They create repetitive narratives in our minds, shaping how we perceive ourselves in the world, driving our behaviors and decisions. The less aware we are of them, the more control they exert over us. Sarah's shadow complex had been carefully constructed over years of perfectionist conditioning. Her immigrant parents had sacrificed everything for her education, constantly reminding her that failure wasn't an option. "We didn't come to America so you could be ordinary," her mother would say. The message was clear. Anything less than perfection was betrayal. So Sarah's psyche created what Jung would recognize as a classic shadow pattern: the perfectionist saboteur. This complex sets unattainable standards, creating a psychological trap where success becomes impossible and failure becomes inevitable. The shadow whispers, "If you can't be perfect, don't try at all. If you can't guarantee success, create failure instead." The genius of shadow sabotage is its invisibility. Sarah experiences the panic attacks as external symptoms, never recognizing them as internal sabotage. Her conscious mind desperately wants to succeed, while her unconscious mind systematically undermines every effort. It's psychological warfare, and the victim never sees the enemy. Jung identified several key mechanisms through which the shadow operates as a saboteur. Projection: disowned traits are projected onto others, fostering judgment and external conflict. Sarah finds herself criticizing other residents for the very mistakes she fears making herself. Self-sabotage: hidden fears trigger resistance to change, undermining growth efforts. The panic attacks ensure Sarah never has to face her deepest terror, that she might actually fail on her own merit. Inner critic: harsh self-judgment arises from suppressed fears and emotional wounds. Sarah's internal voice has become a relentless prosecutor, finding her guilty before she even enters the operating room. But the most insidious aspect of shadow sabotage is how it masquerades as protection. Sarah's panic attacks aren't random, they're strategic. They occur precisely when she's about to step into her full power as a surgeon. The shadow has calculated that it's better to fail from anxiety than to risk failing from incompetence. Better to be a victim of circumstance than a victim of inadequacy. This is what Jung meant when he said the shadow contains both our greatest fears and our greatest potential. Sarah's terror of imperfection is matched only by her capacity for excellence. Her fear of failure is proportional to her ability to succeed. The shadow doesn't sabotage random people. It sabotages those who pose the greatest threat to its protective mission. As Sarah finally manages to start her car and drive home through the empty streets, she has no idea that her breakdown is actually a breakthrough waiting to happen. The very intensity of her self-sabotage reveals the magnitude of her suppressed power. The shadow that's been her enemy contains the key to becoming her greatest ally. But first, she'll have to do the one thing that terrifies her more than any surgery. She'll have to stop running from herself and turn to face the darkness within. Because as Jung discovered, the shadow only has power over us as long as it remains unconscious. The moment we see it clearly, everything changes. The architecture of self-destruction is also the blueprint for reconstruction. The mind that can create such elaborate sabotage can also create extraordinary success, once it stops working against itself and starts working as a unified whole. 3. The masks we wear. When your identity becomes your prison. Jennifer Martinez had perfected the art of being perfect. At 32, she was the ideal daughter, the supportive wife, the dedicated teacher, the reliable friend. Everyone loved Jennifer. Everyone except Jennifer herself. Standing in her kitchen at midnight, mechanically preparing tomorrow's lunches while her family slept, she felt like she was suffocating behind a mask she could never remove. What Jennifer didn't understand is that she was trapped in what Jung called the persona. The social mask we wear to meet external expectations. While the persona is necessary for social functioning, it becomes a prison when we over-identify with it, losing touch with our authentic selves. And when the persona becomes rigid, it creates its own form of shadow sabotage. Jung recognized that in American culture, certain personas are particularly valued and therefore particularly dangerous. The culture that celebrates the self-made individual often creates personas built on denial of vulnerability, need, or limitation. Jennifer had constructed what Jung would call the perfect caregiver persona. Always giving, never needing, perpetually available to solve everyone else's problems. But personas, like all psychological structures, create their opposite in the shadow. The more Jennifer presented herself as endlessly capable and selfless, the more her shadow accumulated resentment, exhaustion, and rage. These suppressed emotions didn't disappear. They went underground, emerging as passive-aggressive behavior, chronic fatigue, and a growing sense of emptiness that no amount of external validation could fill. The shadow of the caregiver persona is what Jung would call the martyr. The martyr sacrifices their own needs and desires for others, driven by a desire to be needed and appreciated, often resulting in burnout, resentment, and enabling behavior. Jennifer's shadow had learned that love was conditional on usefulness, so it created a psychological system where her worth depended entirely on her ability to serve others. This creates a devastating psychological trap. Jennifer's conscious mind craves recognition and appreciation, but her shadow ensures she never asks for what she needs directly. Instead, she gives compulsively, then feels hurt and angry when others don't reciprocate with the same intensity. She's created a rigged game where she always loses, then wonders why she feels so bitter. The American cultural context makes this pattern particularly toxic. In a society that values independence and self-reliance, admitting need feels like failure. Jennifer's persona tells her that good people don't have needs, that strong people don't ask for help, that worthy people solve their own problems. So her shadow finds indirect ways to express these forbidden needs, through illness, exhaustion, and emotional breakdowns that force others to care for her. Jung observed that Americans historically project their collective shadow onto marginalized groups, but individuals do the same thing in their personal lives. Jennifer projects her own neediness onto her students, her own anger onto her husband, her own selfishness onto anyone who dares to prioritize their own needs. She can't see these qualities in herself because they contradict her persona, so she sees them everywhere else instead. The tragedy is that Jennifer's authentic self, her creativity, her passion, her legitimate needs and desires, has been buried so deeply beneath her persona that she's forgotten it exists. She's become a ghost haunting her own life, going through the motions of living while feeling increasingly dead inside. But Jung knew something that Jennifer doesn't yet understand. The persona is not the enemy. The problem isn't that she wears a mask, it's that she's forgotten she's wearing one. The persona becomes pathological only when we mistake it for our true identity, when we become so identified with our role that we lose touch with our essence. As Jennifer finally turns off the kitchen light and heads upstairs, she passes a mirror in the hallway. For just a moment, she catches a glimpse of something in her reflection. A flicker of the woman she used to be before she became everyone else's version of who she should be. It's a terrifying glimpse, because it reminds her of everything she's sacrificed to maintain her perfect image. But it's also a hopeful glimpse, because it proves that her authentic self is still there, waiting beneath the mask. The woman who once dreamed of writing novels, who laughed too loudly and loved too fiercely, who had opinions and desires and the courage to express them, she's not gone. She's just been exiled to the shadow, waiting for Jennifer to remember that she's more than the sum of other people's expectations. The journey back to authenticity begins with a simple but revolutionary act. Taking off the mask, even if just for a moment, and remembering who you were before you became who you thought you had to be. For the hidden gold. Reclaiming your disowned power. David Kim sat in his therapist's office, describing the same pattern for the 100th time. "I don't understand it," he said, running his hands through his hair. "Every time I'm about to close a big deal, something goes wrong. I forget important details, I second-guess myself, I find ways to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. It's like I'm allergic to success." What David didn't realize is that he was describing what Jung called the golden shadow, the positive qualities and potentials that we've disowned and relegated to the unconscious. While most people think of the shadow as purely negative, Jung understood that it often contains our greatest gifts, talents, and capacities for growth. David's story began in childhood, like all shadow stories do. Growing up in a traditional Korean-American household, he learned early that standing out was dangerous. His father, a humble shop owner, would become visibly uncomfortable whenever David excelled at school or showed entrepreneurial ambition. "Don't get too big for your britches," his father would say, unconsciously echoing the same fear that had limited his own potential. Humble people are happy people. So David's psyche did what all psyches do when faced with conflicting messages. It found a way to survive. It took his natural confidence, his business acumen, his ability to think big and dream boldly, and buried them in the shadow. These weren't negative qualities, but they felt dangerous in his family system, so they had to be hidden away. Now, at 38, David's golden shadow contains everything he needs to succeed: confidence, vision, leadership ability, and the courage to take calculated risks. But because these qualities were banished to the unconscious, they only emerge in distorted ways. His confidence becomes arrogance at crucial moments. His vision becomes grandiosity that alienates potential partners. His leadership becomes domination that pushes people away. This is the tragedy of the golden shadow. Our greatest strengths become our greatest weaknesses when they operate unconsciously. David sabotages himself not because he lacks the ability to succeed, but because he possesses it in such abundance that it terrifies the part of him that learned success was dangerous. Jung understood that American culture creates particular patterns of golden shadow exile. In a society that values humility and not getting too big for your britches, many people banish their natural confidence and ambition. In a culture that prizes emotional control, people exile their passion and intensity. In a system that rewards conformity, individuals hide their creativity and originality. The result is a nation of people walking around with their greatest gifts locked away in psychological prisons, wondering why they feel so empty and unfulfilled. They've been taught to fear their own power, to distrust their own instincts, to minimize their own potential. The very qualities that could transform their lives have been labeled as dangerous, selfish, or inappropriate. But Jung discovered something revolutionary. The shadow integration process isn't about eliminating negative qualities. It's about reclaiming positive ones. The goal isn't to become a different person. It's to become a whole person. It's about taking back the parts of yourself that you gave away to survive, to fit in, to be loved and accepted. For David, this means recognizing that his self-sabotage isn't a character flaw. It's a protective mechanism that's outlived its usefulness. His unconscious mind is still operating from the 8-year-old's understanding that success equals rejection, that confidence equals abandonment, that standing out equals danger. The path forward requires what Jung called moral courage, the willingness to own and express the disowned parts of ourselves. This isn't about becoming selfish or arrogant. It's about finding mature, healthy ways to express qualities that have been suppressed. David needs to learn that he can be confident without being cocky, ambitious without being ruthless, successful without being selfish. As David leaves his therapy session and walks through the bustling streets of downtown, he feels something shifting inside him. For the first time, he's beginning to see his self-sabotage not as evidence of his inadequacy, but as proof of his power. The very intensity of his internal resistance reveals the magnitude of what he's been hiding from himself. The golden shadow doesn't sabotage random people. It sabotages those who have the most to offer the world. David's fear of success is proportional to his capacity for it. His terror of standing out is matched by his ability to lead. His anxiety about his own power is evidence that the power is real. The journey of reclaiming the golden shadow is the journey of coming home to yourself. Not the self you think you should be, but the self you actually are. It's about remembering that you were born with gifts that the world needs, and that hiding those gifts serves no one. Not you, not your family, not the world that's waiting for what only you can offer. 5. The integration. Turning your greatest enemy into your greatest ally. Maria Gonzalez stood at the edge of the cliff, not literally but psychologically. After 4 chapters of recognizing her shadow patterns, understanding her persona prison, and glimpsing her golden shadow, she faced the ultimate question. Now what? How do you integrate a lifetime of unconscious sabotage into conscious wholeness? The answer, Jung discovered, lies not in eliminating the shadow but in forming a relationship with it. Integration doesn't mean becoming perfect. It means becoming complete. It means recognizing that the very mechanisms that have been sabotaging you contain the seeds of your transformation. Maria's shadow had been her inner critic for 30 years, the voice that told her she wasn't smart enough, talented enough, worthy enough to pursue her dreams of becoming an artist. This critic had kept her trapped in a soul-crushing corporate job, convinced that creativity was selfish, that art was impractical, that dreams were for other people. But through the integration process, Maria began to see her inner critic differently. Yes, it had been harsh and limiting, but it had also been trying to protect her from the vulnerability that comes with putting your authentic self into the world. It had been trying to save her from potential rejection, criticism, and failure. The problem wasn't that it cared. The problem was that it cared too much and knew too little about what she actually needed. Jung's approach to shadow integration involves what he called active imagination, consciously dialoguing with the unconscious parts of ourselves. Instead of trying to silence her inner critic, Maria learned to have conversations with it. She discovered that underneath its harsh exterior was a frightened child who had learned that being ordinary was safer than risking being extraordinary and failing. "I understand you're scared," Maria would tell her inner critic during these dialogues. "You've been trying to protect me and I appreciate that. But I'm not 8 years old anymore. I can handle criticism. I can survive failure. What I can't survive is never trying at all." This process of compassionate dialogue transforms the shadow from an enemy into an ally. The inner critic becomes an inner advisor, offering valuable feedback without the destructive emotional charge. The saboteur becomes a guardian, protecting against real dangers while allowing for necessary risks. The prison becomes a sanctuary, providing safety without limiting growth. But integration requires more than just internal dialogue. It requires external action. Jung emphasized that insights without implementation become mere intellectual exercises. The shadow can only be truly integrated when we begin expressing our disowned parts in healthy, mature ways. For Maria, this meant finally enrolling in art classes, setting up a studio in her garage, and gradually sharing her work with others. Each brushstroke was an act of integration, each painting a declaration that she was more than her fears had allowed her to believe. The shadow that had once whispered, "You're not good enough," began to whisper, "You're getting better," instead. The American cultural context makes this integration process both more necessary and more challenging. In a society that values quick fixes and instant transformation, the slow, patient work of shadow integration can feel frustratingly gradual. But Jung understood that psychological wholeness, like physical healing, takes time and consistent effort. The integration process also requires what Jung called holding the tension of opposites. Instead of trying to choose between confidence and humility, success and service, independence and connection, integrated individuals learn to embody both poles of human experience. They become comfortable with contradiction, paradox, and complexity. Maria discovered that she could be both practical and creative, both responsible and spontaneous, both grounded and visionary. The either/or thinking that had kept her trapped gave way to both/ and wisdom that allowed her to live as a complete human being rather than a partial one. As Maria puts the finishing touches on her latest painting, a self-portrait that somehow captures both her light and her shadow, she realizes that the journey isn't over. Integration isn't a destination but a process, not an achievement but a practice. There will always be new aspects of herself to discover, new shadows to integrate, new wholeness to embody. But for the first time in her life, she's not fighting herself anymore. The civil war between her conscious desires and unconscious fears has ended, replaced by an inner alliance that makes anything possible. She's learned the ultimate truth that Jung spent his lifetime teaching. The goal isn't to eliminate the darkness within us, but to make it conscious, to befriend it, and to harness its power in service of our highest potential. The shadow that once betrayed her has become her most trusted ally. The enemy within has revealed itself to be the hero she was waiting for all along. And in that recognition, Maria has found something more valuable than success, more precious than perfection, more transformative than any external achievement. She has found herself, whole and complete, light and shadow dancing together in the magnificent complexity of being fully human. The dark psychology of self-sabotage has been transformed into the luminous psychology of self-integration. And in that transformation, not just Maria but everyone whose life she touches is forever changed. Because when we stop betraying ourselves, we become capable of truly serving others. When we integrate our shadows, we become beacons of possibility for everyone still lost in their own darkness. This is Jung's ultimate gift to humanity. The recognition that our greatest wounds contain our greatest gifts, our deepest fears point toward our highest potential, and our most persistent enemies are actually our most powerful allies in disguise. The journey from self-sabotage to self-integration is the hero's journey of our time, and it begins with a single courageous step, turning to face the darkness within and discovering that it was never darkness at all. It was simply light that had forgotten how to shine. Tonight, as you close your eyes, remember this. Every moment you've spent fighting yourself, every dream you've abandoned, every time you felt like your own worst enemy, it wasn't weakness. It was your soul crying out for wholeness. Your shadow wasn't trying to destroy you. It was trying to save the parts of you that the world told you to hide. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." But here's what he also knew. On the other side of that terror lies the most beautiful thing. The discovery that you were never broken, never flawed, never less than whole. You were simply human, carrying both light and darkness, waiting for the moment when you'd be brave enough to embrace it all. The person watching this video right now, the one who's been sabotaging their dreams, who's been wearing masks, who's been hiding their gifts, you are not your shadow. You are not your fears. You are not your patterns. You are the consciousness that can observe all of these things, which means you are the consciousness that can transform them. Your greatest enemy has always been your greatest teacher. Your deepest wound has always contained your most profound gift. And the very fact that you're here listening to these words means you're already on the path home to yourself. The integration has already begun. The healing is already happening. You are already becoming who you were always meant to be. If this story resonated with you, if you recognized yourself in Maria's journey, or if you're ready to stop betraying yourself and start befriending your shadow, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me, what mask have you been wearing? What part of yourself have you been hiding? What would change in your life if you stopped fighting yourself and started working with yourself instead? And if you're ready to dive deeper into the psychology of transformation, to explore more stories that illuminate the path from self-sabotage to self-integration, hit that subscribe button and join our community of seekers who are brave enough to face their shadows and reclaim their light. Thank you for taking this journey with me, for having the courage to look within, and for being part of a community that believes transformation is not only possible, it's inevitable when we stop running from ourselves and start running toward wholeness.